Welcome to Transforming Assessment webinar series for the 3rd of May. Today's session is called Dialogue Plus, our students learning about assessment in first year. Our presenters today are Rebecca Westrup from the University of East Anglia and Professor Sue Bloxham from University of Cumbria, both in the UK. So Rebecca, would you like to begin, please? Rebecca, you need to press your talk button.
Hello everybody. Thank you, Matthew. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep, I'm getting ticks, so I'm guessing that's a good thing. So thank you, Matthew, for inviting me and for providing all of the technical support. First of all, I'm really delighted to be able to talk to you this morning or this evening about a project that I've been working on, looking at promoting first-year undergraduate students' understanding of and participation within assessment and feedback processes. It's a subject that is very much part of my day-to-day job and also something that is really quite close to my heart as well. So if you do have any questions or ways and thoughts that I can move this forward, I would really appreciate it. Sue Bloxham will be monitoring the text chat to see if there are any questions that you have as well. And as Matthew was saying, I will be stopping at intervals to see if any questions have arisen. I really hope that you will get involved with asking lots of questions and giving me your thoughts, as I was saying, so that I can move this forward as well. So there we are. I don't know if you've seen us before, but hello. The focus of the session today, first of all, I will be outlining the Dialogue Plus project. It has taken place in the University of East Anglia with 2 different subjects, so hopefully that will be quite interesting. I'll be looking at what we did. So if you're interested in implementing a similar project within your disciplines, you'll be able to look at this and adapt it if you wish to. I'll also be looking at what we found, because I think there were some really interesting points that have arisen, some positive outcomes, but also some challenges that have presented themselves to me that perhaps naively I hadn't thought about before. And then I would like to think about reflections and also future conversations as well. As I was saying, there will be some activity questions where I'd like you to think about your practice, or perhaps your practices if you're working across different disciplines. But first of all, some slides to contextualise the project. You're probably wondering where the project originated from. We know that a lot of the literature talks about the importance of dialogue and how dialogue is helpful, and increasingly in my role as course director, so I'm in charge of the BA education at UEA and thinking about pedagogical and assessment practices as well as quality assurance processes for the courses. I'm continually reminded about the importance of student voice, and I really became interested in the idea of dialogue personally when a student actually asked me this question: how do you know what I would like feedback on so that I can use it in my next assignment? You've not asked me. And I thought, gosh, you're so right. I hadn't asked the students what they wanted feedback on. The student voice, for me, up until this point a couple of years ago, it wasn't a visual part of the feedback practice, and so this really sparked an interest for me, and it reminded me of a quotation from Bell Hooks, that conversation as a mode of interaction calls us to open our minds, and that was through this question myself opening my mind, but also through the mode of conversation encouraging students to open their minds as well to the different possibilities, rather than just submitting a piece of work at the end of a module, perhaps at the end of a semester or the end of the year as well, and then not really thinking about it. moving on to the next module or having the long summer break before then starting the year. And this was also grounded in my interest in assessment. As I mentioned at the beginning, assessment is something that I'm very passionate about. My PhD research looked at the notion of authorization within the assessment process. So how we can encourage students to become authors of their own writing within the often prescribed assessment processes, thinking about a student identity and whether they do actually have possibilities to be authors, to be able to have a sense of agency and make choices in their writing and also the assessment process as well. And including and developing this idea around dialogue has really, I think, quite naturally evolved as part of this. So to give some further context from the research field, if we think about Sue Bloxham, for example, David Carless, Margaret Price, lots of people have been researching and exploring students' understanding of assessment. When do students understand? And how, as a course director or a module lecturer, how can we try to support students' understanding so that they do not become over-dependent on tutor feedback, especially written feedback? How can we encourage students to have a sense of agency, be active in this process as well? How can we help them to make their own sense of it? Feedback is often in lecturers' words, so how can we encourage students to have their own words within those as well? And there was lots of research about the value of dialogue and the value of dialogue in feedback from people such as, I've mentioned before, Carless, and then I came across Sue's research with Liz Campbell at the University of Cumbria, looking at the process of an interactive cover sheet. And I thought, brilliant. But as you may know if you've read the paper, there were some challenges presented within this, and students didn't always know what to ask and felt unable to because of the perceived power imbalances between students and lecturers. And before I go any further, I would just like to ask you about your backgrounds, what role you have within a university. So I don't know if you'd be able to write in the text box what roles you have, please, just so I can see whether you're like myself or educational designer. Thank you, Anglia. Thank you, Matthew, as well. To yours there. Oh, it's going quite quickly now. Okay, brilliant. So lots of different roles coming together. Yeah, thank you.
Just to say, Rebecca, can you hear me, Rebecca?
Yes, I can.
Oh yeah, just to say, for some reason I'm just not seeing what people are saying, but I'll see if I can sort that. But you carry on. At least you
scroll to the bottom, Sue.
Okay, thank you, Sue.
Okay.
So there are lots of different. I can see that there are lots of different roles, which is brilliant, and hopefully we can have a really good discussion about how we can try and improve and enhance dialogue from all of these different roles as well, because I think one of the challenges I have being within as the course director is that it's often quite difficult to speak to different people from different roles as well. So it's great to have everybody coming together. Thank you for sharing those. I think that's really, really useful. Thank you. I also, excuse me, have a role within the university of being a senior advisor. So I'm responsible within the School of Education and Lifelong Learning for students' academic and pastoral well-being, as well as their employability as well. So another reason why I wanted to look at the interactive cover sheet and also creating more dialogue is to be able to support students more holistically. And I was at a Higher Education Academy workshop back in November last year now, and this diagram was used from NEF, and it's the workshop was about well-being and thinking about how it's important to connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give. And for me, the idea of dialogue and the interactive cover sheet has the opportunity to be able to really support students with their 5 ways of well-being. And so the project has kind of moved on slightly to be able to think about students' well-being as well with that. And I'll talk a little bit more about the design of the Dialogue Plus in a moment. But thinking about the shift in culture really, and within the UK, this has been something that has taken on quite recently very relevant developments, is how we think about students' engagement within higher education. And I know from talking to Matthew briefly when we were looking at listening to the technology and checking that it worked before, that this is also something that is of paramount importance to people thinking in Australia and other countries as well. And Margaret Price and her colleagues have provided this useful model for thinking about assessment and student engagement and how students can learn about the process. You may have seen it before, and they identify 4 different models of engagement. If we start the one at the bottom right, the traditional model, something that they describe as being like the Oxford tutorial system. So before the massification of higher education, it was possible for academic communities to have more dialogue quite naturally because they were smaller academic communities. There were fewer students. And so sharing of assessment practices happened over a period of time. There wasn't a sense of explicitness really, but students could talk and discuss ideas, almost absorb or enculture the ideas about assessment over time. And then following the massification of higher education, we've moved into more of the dominant logic, explicit models, and more recently the socio-constructivist model. And I hope that the Dialogue Plus project is kind of sitting between the social constructivist model and also the cultivated community of practice model as well, because those 2 models promote active learning. The socio-constructivist model is about student learning through assessment, standards, using and learning the application of these so that they can create their own sense of meaning. It's a very student-centered approach. Students learn about and become more familiar with the standards and practices. But as Price and her colleagues have highlighted, there are still some concerns between the educator and the learner because the tutor is the authoritative one. And the students can lack a sense of a proactive role within that. And then the cultivated community of practice model really helps to promote the idea of tacit knowledge and embraces the active community. It proposes a community of practice where students and staff can be joint partners. And I do have some concerns over this idea about joint partners, because I personally don't know if a student could ever be a joint partner with a lecturer, because there is always the assessment process involved within that. There are lots we can do to try and bridge the gap, I think, with that. And this is where, for me, Dialogue Plus is perhaps one way in which we can do that. And so, drawing on Sue and Liz Campbell's work, we have the interactive cover sheet, which looks like this. And the interactive cover sheet allows students to ask lecturers questions when they hand in a piece of work. For me, that was whether it was a formative piece or indeed a summative piece as well. So the students could ask tutors questions. But different to Sue's work, I then included peer learning mentors to try and overcome some of the concerns that Sue and Liz identified, particularly around students being intimidated or perhaps embarrassed to ask their lecturers questions. So the process, if you like, for the Dialogue Plus project is, first of all, we had some mentor training, and I'll talk through that in a moment. And then we have a series of workshops. Then a student submits a formative piece of work to gain feedback from the lecturer. And then they have a second workshop. And then the mentoring continues into semester 2. So the research part of the project took place over an academic year and was based within arts and humanities and also social sciences faculties as well. The main research methods were observations of the Dialogue Plus workshops, crucially asking students about their understanding of standards of writing and expectations. And then there was a series of focus groups, first of all at the end of semester 1, the autumn semester, and then again at the end of semester 2. So coming up to around this time now to try and see if there was any progression. And then there were also interviews with the lecturers and the focus group with the peer mentors as well. So who were the Dialogue Plus mentors? And I think this is an important part of the process. Students were selected from, as I say, the arts and humanities and social sciences faculties, and the students were achieving at least a 2-1 degree classification. So we could be confident as lecturers that they had demonstrable knowledge surrounding academic writing and communication, particularly the conventions around academic writing within the university. So knowing what an argument looks like, knowing how to embed critical analysis within their writing, for example. Some of the students had previous mentoring experience, but this wasn't an essential part of the job description, if you like, because they were given training before engaging with the mentoring process as well. The first workshop, oh, I can see here, has somebody raised a hand there?
Hi, Kat.
Question,
yeah, I think so, Kat. If you could kindly type your question into the text chat, and we'll leave the microphone business until the end. Hopefully that's what you meant by the hands up symbol.
Okay, so should I continue?
Yes, please do.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. And I can see Frederic has also asked the question. The 2-1 classification would be, sorry about that, 2-1 is a mark of 60 and above out of 100. So within the UK we have first class degrees which are 70 and above, and then 2-1 is 60 and above, a 2-2 is 50 and above, and a third is 40 and above, and anything below a 40 is a fail. So hopefully that helps clarify that. So in the first workshop, students were really kind of focusing on what it meant to study at university. This workshop happened in week 4 of the first semester for these students. So they were very new to university. They had lots of different concerns, lots of different questions, and assessment, perhaps unsurprisingly, was something that was very paramount to them. These workshops were embedded within a module that we have which looks at academic development and academic skills. So looking at how students write essays at university, how do we understand assessment, how do we read critically at university. Those, I don't like to use the word skills because I think there's a lot more than skills that happens within it, but hopefully that's given you an idea of what the module is about at its core. And so in this introductory session, which was delivered by the module lecturers and also the first year students met the peer mentors for the first time, and the focus was on assessment and feedback, and also the types of questions or questioning techniques that could be used to gain feedback within the interactive cover sheet. So whereas in Sue's paper they identify that the interactive cover sheet had some positive features, and you could see that there was a sense of progression, there were still some concerns because of the perceived power balance, or imbalance I should say, sorry, between the lecturers and the students. And so the idea behind the peer mentoring was for the students in years 2 and 3, the peer mentors, to share their ideas and to hopefully put the first year students at ease a little bit, try to ease their worries. And so to be able to find out what their worries were, we first of all asked the students what their concerns were. And these were broken down into concerns about assessment, the purpose of assessment, what the purpose of assignments were as well, formative and summative, and what the tutors, what the lecturers are looking for when they mark assignments. And these were questions that the year 2 and 3 mentors thought would be useful. And the peer mentors also described their learning trajectories with hindsight and suggested and discussed questions that would have been useful to ask about within their writing and assessment processes. So again, they could talk to the year 1 students about what their feelings were to I suppose in a way try and, like I say, ease and perhaps normalise, I say quite tentatively there, the feelings and the worries that the first years had. Timing of this first workshop was important because it meant that students could ask questions about a formative piece of work that they were submitting later on that week. And so these were the findings that we found from the students' concerns. They were, in terms of the concerns about assessment, they had worries about their writing style. They wanted it to sound academic because they were at university now. But what does academic actually mean? Making sure they answered the question as well. In terms of the purpose of assessment, they thought it was to test abilities and understanding, to get feedback. The purpose of assignments was quite interesting because it's very much around testing, and I think that's quite a natural way for the students to feel, particularly those who have transitioned directly from college or school into university as well, because there's lots of emphasis on testing and examination as well. as part of the workshop, the students were also introduced to the marking criteria, which at UEA is the UEA Senate Scale. And they were told these kind of points, that the characteristics are fundamental to a good essay. You know about these and you won't go far wrong. This is what the mentors wanted to say to the students. And that crucially, I think this final point, accept that your understanding of these will develop as you get more experienced in writing at degree level as well. And so as part of the workshop, the students had to rewrite, with the mentors' support and input, these learning outcomes and the different criteria into their own words, so that we knew that they had an understanding of what it meant. And from those, the students then write down their questions on the interactive cover sheet to be submitted for the formative piece of work. Once the students had received the formative piece of work back, which was towards the end of semester 1 in approximately week 8, so it gave them enough time to then work on the feedback for the next assignment, the summative piece. And these workshops were very much facilitated by the mentors. At this point, I took a step back because I wanted it to be about the student voice, student engagement, student participation. And so the students learned how they could utilise the feedback to be able to evaluate their effectiveness. So thinking about the types of questions that they had written and whether it had yielded helpful feedback. Some students had written questions that really only required a yes-no response, even despite having some of the training. So that wasn't particularly good. But then with the support of the mentors, the students were then able to think about what questions they could then ask and also feed forward into their next assignments as well. I'm just looking at the textbook. Yes, it is a Senate scale across the whole university. So I hope that helps. And then within each course, we then use the Senate scale as a basis and map our learning outcomes to that as well. So what did the students say in terms of the intervention? First of all, they highlighted at the end of semester 1, so sort of midway point throughout the project, that there was a sense of progress of how the interactive cover sheet and also the dialogue with the mentors and lecturers had helped them to learn and grasp some understanding of the demands of writing an assessment. And I apologise, there is a lot of text coming up with quotations, but I wanted to put it in so that you can see the students' voices. I'm going to use some of them here, but you can always go back to them as well. There was lots of talk about learning how to write essays. Talking about your little worries can be constructive. Interestingly, I thought it was surprising, I suppose, how the students were talking about their worries as silly, kind of little worries, silly worries, when actually they're not silly at all. I suppose it's like there's no such thing as a bad question idea. There was also a sense of the students needing to be proactive and reflecting on the learning journey as well. I think listening and learning from the second and third year students encouraged them to reflect on how they use their essays to be able to develop as well, and then realising that they could go and see their lecturer. However, as I was saying at the beginning, there were still some challenges, some bits that perhaps were a little bit lost in the translation of the assessment and feedback process. think the quote on the right-hand side, I think it shouldn't be compulsory. I think it felt more like we had to fill it in, maybe, was really interesting, because the interactive cover sheet wasn't actually compulsory. Now, it's part of a compulsory module in Year 1, so it has made me think about the timing and the positioning of this project, because I didn't intend for it to be seen as compulsory, or indeed, as you can see in the quote on the left-hand side, they describe it as something that starts to be a problem, and it stresses you out instead of being helpful. They were seeing it as something that was last minute, and they identified that it should be a process. When in actual fact, I had thought that from workshop 1 to then completing the interactive cover sheet to then workshop 2, that it was more of a process. So I think I definitely need to think about that, and I'd be interested to hear some more from you if any of you have some thoughts about that at the end, please. I do wonder if it is because the questions, if you like, the interactive cover sheet was written on UEA headed paper, for example. Is it something that looks very formal and official? So that's something that I'm going to be exploring later. Again, the idea about it being nerve-wracking was another interesting finding, because we hadn't intended for it to be nerve-wracking at all. So I'm just going to have a drink of water. It is interesting to note that the student on the left seems to be engaging with the guidance excuse me, and assessment process, because they talk about reading the guidelines for the essay and mark scheme. Excuse me. But it wasn't supposed to be something that made them nervous. Now, I know there are some people that would argue that learning takes place when situations are uncomfortable, and it's interesting that, like Sue and Campbell's research, the last-minuteness of the interactive cover sheet seemed to prevent what they talk about as serious engagement due to the stress as well. So I don't know if we could pause for a moment there and have a think about whether people do think that learning happens in uncomfortable situations, and whether we should promote uncomfortable situations for learning. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that, please.
This is a point maybe where people wanted to speak. We could do that.
Mm-hmm.
We're all just feeling a bit uncomfortable, I think.
Sorry, am I making it?
No,
I'm quite happy. Yes, you know, I know. I'm happy to read the text box if people would rather write it in the chat box. So Liberty is saying that they think it's more so in the reflection on the uncomfortable experience. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, that we need to, it's not the uncomfortable experience itself, but that we have to then learn from it as well. And Joy and Rachel agreeing, yes, can happen in stressful situations, but not only there. And Rachel, your point's very interesting, that as long as is that they aren't comfortable? And, oh, sorry, I need to scroll down. Sorry, aren't too unpleasant. Yes, completely. Support should be available. Yeah, good point, Phil. That they're new students, so they can't feel anything but out of their depth. Tim is saying that he's not sure that uncomfortable is the key thing. You need to be pushed, which can be scary. Yeah, the pushing rather than the scariness is the key. Jill is talking about, I don't know how we can completely reduce anxiety in assessment activities. Students talk about needing the adrenaline rush to complete an assignment. Yes, good point there. Yeah, I think it's really interesting how students need to be supported to get into that liminal space once we develop. So Deb Green is talking about developing a climate that is cohesive when feeling uncomfortable. We need to work in the students' ZPD, their zone of proximal development. Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Thank you for those. I've just noticed the time, so I'm going to continue, if that's okay with everyone, but we do have some time at the end, so we can continue talking about this if you wish to. At the end of semester 2, so 6 to 7 months into the project, the intervention, there did seem to be a greater sense of formative value, and the students realising how they could use the interactive cover sheet. So it was becoming more part of their daily routine as well. Some students talked about it as being reassuring. This quote was quite interesting. It acts as a sort of third party, so you can talk to your cover sheet without getting embarrassed. It's quite reassuring, as they say in the other quote, to be reassured that you're doing the right thing. And there are also facets of feeding forward, so thinking with Di Hounsel's work about how it can help as well. So similar findings to Sue and Liz's work about how there is a sense of progress. Something that I think was different to Sue and Liz's findings was that the students did feel able to ask their tutors questions, and they developed understanding and tended to use the interactive cover sheet less as their understanding developed further as well. So they talked about how they'd got to know their lecturers a bit more, and they'd started to use the interactive cover sheet less really, which for me was a positive sign, because it meant that rather than having the conversation through the piece of paper, that they were actually able to get to know their lecturer and start talking to them, start having that dialogue with them some more as well. And what was the influence of the mentoring? I think the mentoring is a key role, really, because the mentors, like with other mentoring situations, have helped to bridge the gap between students and their lecturers. The mentors were approachable, and they helped the students to, I like to think of it as settling in, really. So the quotation on the right says, I think that when you're in your first year, you feel apprehensive, like being the person going forward and saying, I want to talk to you, always made it so that they were around straight after our module. They would be there, we could ask anything as well. And the students talk of the mentors being useful, reassuring, because the mentors were able to say, as the quote on the left says, oh yes, I was unsure of this, and whatever, and like talking about their own experiences and stuff like that as well. The lecturers also said that they found using the cover sheet and the intervention quite a useful approach, but the students did tend to use the cover sheet in different ways depending on the assessment, which again I think is quite normal within the practice of assessment and feedback, because the students were more inclined to use the cover sheets and the mentoring with formative pieces. So that's something that I still want to address, because I would love for the students to complete the interactive cover sheet more with the summative pieces as well, so that they can then see the linkage between perhaps one module that finishes in December and another module that begins in January as well, because there are some overlaps with the modules. The lecturers also said that they could see a sense of development in the student engagement as well from their perspective. They say it was a useful tool by which I could give them support and guidance. So in terms of the sorts of questions that they were actually putting on the forms, they were structured in a way that I could actually do something positive to be able to help them. They talk as well about it being very generic in the first semester, whereas in the second semester, say, I think when the students were more comfortable with it as a tool, but they were also more comfortable in terms of what the university demands of them were, they were a bit more established here. They were able to make more of it as a tool, which meant I could use it more effectively or use my response to it more effectively to help them as well. So is it a valuable tool? And I really can't generalise because we've looked at 2 courses within one university, but there is evidence of the Dialogue project, the interactive cover sheet and the mentoring giving students a sense of more engagement and control over the feedback process, as this quote from the lecturer demonstrates. But it also highlights that some of the students need to be more perhaps practiced at using it as well. I think the research also reminded me of the importance of context as well and where it's best placed. I thought that the first semester of the first year would be a good place to put the intervention, but reflecting back, I do wonder if that was too early a point when the students are still undertaking the transition. Perhaps after the Christmas break, so halfway through the first year, may have been a good place as well to have started it. The lecturer also talked about having the extra layer is a good thing, but that it very much depends on the school as well, because as the intervention progressed throughout the year, the peer mentors were used less and less, which again I see as quite a positive point, because the first year students were then having more confidence in what they were doing. But I think these are all points that I need to consider. So just some thoughts as we're coming to the end of the session to conclude really. It was interesting to note that the intervention did provide reassurance for some of the students, and I think there was evidence of some increasing confidence when talking to lecturers about work and feedback. I was really pleased that the students, some of them, felt able to actually go and talk to the lecturers rather than using the interactive cover sheet towards the end of the second semester. And I also think the intervention provided students with a thinking tool, and the mentoring helped the students to think about why dialogue is important, why it's important to ask lecturers questions and be proactive in the process. However, I do think there was a tension between the students feeling it's compulsory and me wanting to encourage their autonomy, because I certainly didn't set out to sort of decrease their sense of autonomy, and it was very interesting that they thought that it was compulsory, when I think if this intervention was to ever be made compulsory, then it wouldn't work, because then we certainly would be sort of almost squashing their autonomy. So that's something that I want to work on. And it's also made me question whether the tool is inclusive to all learners as well, particularly learners with additional needs, for example. More recently, this isn't part of the research study, but a couple of weeks ago a student was using the cover sheet, and she has Asperger's, and she found it very difficult to ask the questions and to talk in that way. So that's something that I want to think about in the future as well. And just some questions that I have for you really to finish with is whether you have such a learning environment, or how you can create a learning environment in which dialogue can be enhanced and learning communities can thrive, but I'll also pass over to Sue at this point to see if anyone has any questions or comments. And thank you everybody for listening. Please do ask questions, and hopefully we can continue this discussion now and also in the future if you'd like to. My email and Twitter name are at the beginning of the presentation. So thank you. Anybody have any questions or thoughts, please?
Okay. Thank you very much, Rebecca. There have been a few questions as we've gone along. Some of them are quite practical questions, really. For example, I think it was Liberty and Emma wondered just what class sizes and number of tutors you were working with on this project.
Okay, so the class sizes varied depending on the subjects. One of the class sizes was 40. And there were 2 tutors, and within the arts and humanities, the class sizes were roughly 80 to 100 students, and there were 4 tutors. So quite small numbers, really.
Okay, thank you. And another question was, what did the cover sheet look like in terms of, what were the questions that were asked on it? Was it just one question? What would you like feedback on, or were there more questions for the students?
So if I go back to the cover sheet, the students were asked to identify where they felt that their work sort of was positioned in terms of a grade. So whether they thought they, for example, had met the learning outcomes to a good standard, which is kind of 60 marks and above, and how well they thought that they had engaged with critical analysis, how well they thought they had applied the different concepts. So they had to do that bit first so that their tutors could see where their thinking was, and then they had questions to ask their tutors. So they could ask questions. For example, quite a popular one was, I think I've been critical in using this text to support my points in this order. However, I find it quite difficult to understand another text, so I'm not quite sure if I've embedded it well enough. Does that make sense? Just trying to think. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's helpful, because actually somebody else did. I think so. There's another question about whether the mentoring was group-based or one-to-one.
It was group-based to start with. There were groups of approximately 4 to 5 first-year students per mentor, and that was within the workshops. And then the students could also see the mentor on a one-to-one basis if they wanted to. Particularly, we found that the students wanted to see their mentor on more of a one-to-one basis when they received the comments from their tutors. So there was, first of all, group discussion in the second workshop when the students received their feedback in response to the questions asked. And then the students also, I think about 65% of them asked to then see the mentor individually as well.
Okay, thank you. And an interesting question has come through, I think, from Phil.
No,
is about. Okay, you finish.
I was just going to say that there wasn't very much take-up with the e-mentoring. so kind of more mentoring by email and things like that. The students seem to prefer face-to-face mentoring.
Okay, thank you. Another question that's come up is the sort of continuity between markers. So if the students do 3 assignments, will the marker of the 3rd assignment know what kind of feedback they've had earlier on? And someone was suggesting, does that mean the blind are leaving the blind if they can't really refer to what students have been told in the past?
Yes, yeah, that is a very interesting question. Within one of the subjects, we were able to ensure that there was quite a sense of continuity, because the tutors taught in teams, if you like. So so much the tutors were able to ask each other what aspects had been focused on with the feedback for previous assignments. I think does that answer the question?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. I think it's obviously something that will work well with a small team of tutors, where you can have a lot of communication. And that links to another question: is to what extent do you think this approach would be suitable for other types of assignments? Someone is Cordelia, I think, in engineering, asked about where it perhaps wasn't essay-based, whether you think the same approach might work.
Yeah, I think it could. I don't have any research to support what I'm saying here, but I've spoken to colleagues at UEA. We have a number of teaching fellows, and so I'm a teaching fellow at the moment, and one of my colleagues is a mathematician, and we've discussed how we think it could be applied to, for example, the maths practice questions and things like that, with the students looking at the types of questions that they are being asked to answer, and working that way. So with the mentoring as well, that's something that we're looking at doing in the near future. Hopefully, we're going to be starting that in the autumn semester. But I don't know. Was it Cordelia? Do they have ideas about how it could be applied? But I think again, it would need to be with a smaller, perhaps, cohort size. I would be very interested to do this intervention with a larger cohort of, say, 200 students, to see if it is manageable. I think there would be lots of scaling up with that. And this is quite a luxurious model, I suppose, at the moment, with the lower student numbers. But I think some of the could be applied. Okay. I just asked one last question. There's some practical questions about the mentors and workload. You know, this looked like it was increased workload for staff, and also how did you get the mentors to participate? And were they paid? What was that level of pay set at? Yeah. So the in terms of, first of all, the increased workload for staff, the tutors that we worked with actually said that although there was the initial planning and embedding of the workshops within the courses, once that was done, the actual marking process wasn't that extended, because the students were asking particular questions, and so in a way the lecturers felt that they were able to focus on those as well as the more generic feedback, to be able to help the students. So the feedback was quite focused, if that makes sense, and so it didn't take as lot. Some of the tutors have said that it was actually quicker to write feedback for those that had done the questions and the cover sheet than those that hadn't. And to answer the questions about the mentors. The mentors were paid. They were paid at the like student ambassador rate. So when we have students who work on, I'm trying to think of sort of like equivalent things, so open days and talking to prospective applicants and things like that, they were paid the same rate as that, which I believe is about £8 or £9 per hour.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I
yeah,
think we've come to
I was very.
I think we've come to the end of our time now, Rebecca. I just want to thank you very much, and I apologise for not being able to tackle everybody's questions. I'd like to just add to that last point that when we did this, we also found that tutors said it was quicker to mark when they had questions from students than when they just had to decide themselves what to write. But can I thank Rebecca very much for her presentation, sharing her research with us. And as Matthew's noted in the chat line, please can you all go and fill in the feedback form. Thanks very much, Rebecca, and goodbye to everybody.
Thank you, Sue. It was a pleasure, and thank you all for your comments and questions as well. It's been very interesting for me, and I'll take these forward as well. Thank you very much, and thank you to Matthew as well for organising, and Sue for coordinating the questions and things like that.
You're very welcome, Rebecca. I'm just sticking up your last slide there, so if people have still got questions, please do email Rebecca's email there, or maybe you want to tweet her at a Twitter thing. But yes, thank you very much. We shall hold the recording. The recording will be released soon, including the text chat and a link to the slides. So thank you very much, and we'll be all back again next month for another webinar.